Zimbabwean journalist Hopewell Chin'ono was granted bail yesterday after spending 3 weeks in prison. The journalist was arrested on charges of publishing or communicating falsehoods after he tweeted a video in which an infant was allegedly beaten to death by a police officer, a claim that the state denies. Chin'ono joins us now to talk about his ordeal in prison. Hopewell, good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me on the program.
Now, you've been arrested 3 times in the last 6 months. The latest spell was 20 days on charges of violating a section of the law that you believe has been expunged from the statutes by the country's highest court. Why are you, person non grata, victim number 1 when it comes to this? Why is the state of Zimbabwe just wanting you behind bars?
Well, the obsession for my political persecution is based on the fact that I'm a journalist who has been exposing corruption. Last year, I uncovered one of the biggest looting scandals, which involved the looting of 60 million of public funds that were meant to deal with COVID-19. To me, coming up with trumped up charges and arresting me and throwing me into prison. This particular case, my latest arrest happened on the 8th of February after I'd just flown in from South Africa 2 days before. And the tragedy is that what I'm accused of having said, I actually didn't tweet it. It didn't happen. And the other problem is that the law that was used to charge me does not exist. It was removed from our statutes in 2014. So the whole thing is a charade. They're using courts to persecute political critics.
Yeah. Are they simply not liking the way that you're writing, or is there more to this? Is this a case of you are embarrassing the government, you're embarrassing the police, maybe you're even embarrassing the president himself and his family?
I think it's a mixture of both, the exposures and the embarrassment. Because, for instance, we have a tragic problem in Zimbabwe where our people are having to cross into South Africa using boats, evading border control, because the economic situation in Zimbabwe has really turned out to be one of the worst within the region. And some of the things that are driving this kind of migration from Zimbabwe to South Africa are based on corruption, the looting of public funds. Let me give you a good example. Zimbabwe loses gold worth about $100 million every month. Zimbabwe's 5 central hospitals $US a year for them to run smoothly without any shortages. Yet the gold that is smuggled by the ZANU-PF political elites every month is enough to run the budget for these 5 central hospitals for 2 years. So that's the tragedy. So when you expose this kind of corruption and you are able to explain the relatedness of the corruption to the suffering of the people, you become the marked man and you become time, and embarrassingly this time using a law that does not even exist.
All right, we're having some difficulty with the line, so we want to apologize to our viewers there, Hopewell. It does keep cutting here and there, but we are kind of making a sense of what you're saying to us at the moment. So hopefully there's no meddling with our line at this particular point. Now, Hopewell, talk to me about what goes through your mind when you're being arrested. And do you raise issue with the police that are coming? Do you raise issue with them? Do you say to them, you do know that what you're asking me for is actually not real? This is all made up stuff. And what do they say?
I mean, in the last 2 years, the police themselves acknowledge that they're just being sent by political masters to implement what they know that is not proper. I came from South Africa on the 6th and I was arrested on the 8th. I had met somebody at a luncheon in South Africa on Christmas Day who tested positive. So when I was arrested, I was actually in quarantine, and the police officers understood what it meant, that they're in danger. We are under instructions But they were very clear that they understand that there's nothing wrong that I've done. But they said, you know how the situation is like. We've just been given orders. So that's the tragedy, because in a democracy, in a constitutional democracy, we must have freedom of expression, which includes freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the right government. And all this has been taken away from us. And each time we try to use freedom of the press as journalists to expose corruption, we are then persecuted.
Yeah. Talk to me about the drama that came with your first appearance in court. I think you're already mentioning that you were already in quarantine at the time, but of course the authorities were insisting that you appear in court. That ended up not happening because they were also now fearing for their lives, having learned that you were in quarantine. What was actually happening?
What happened is I was taken to the police station, and the police officers were asked to deal with the case. Were very upset because they understood the implications. COVID-19 is killing people in Zimbabwe because of the looting of public funds that took place last year. There are no sanitizers. I was in prison. There are no masks in prison. They couldn't lift facilities are not there. The money has been looted. So the police were afraid. When I went to court, the prosecutors initially were refusing to come to court. My senior defense counsel, Mr. Harrison Ngomo, had to go and cajole them to say, look, we are here at your invitation. You need to deal with this case. But they were afraid because they were saying that we do not have personal protective. This guy is said to have been in contact with someone who tested positive, so we are putting our lives in danger. But the state, the political bosses who give these instructions were not bothered about it because they are at their homes. They are leaving these policemen and the state prosecutors at the mess of COVID-19, which is a tragedy.
Right. Zimbabwean journalist Hopewell Chin'ono with us tonight was granted bail yesterday after spending 3 weeks in prison. The journalist was arrested on charges of publishing or communicating falsehoods after he tweeted a video in which an infant was allegedly beaten to death by a police officer. He states tonight that, of course, he did not tweet that. It's actually falsehood on the part of the police themselves. He's back with us to talk about his ordeal. So, Hopewell, how has this complicated your life? I mean, let's just talk about the last 6 months. How your life has changed. Are you able to move freely in Zimbabwe? Are you able to be at home without a feeling of being watched, or are the police always following you? How does your life play out?
Yeah, it's very difficult because, for instance, I can't travel outside the country. They took my passport. They took the title deeds to my home. I need to report to my local police station twice every week, on a Monday and on a Friday. And sometimes I see cars parked outside my home, and I know that it means that I'm under surveillance. So the persecution comes in different ways and is meant to break you down psychologically. But because I know that I'm just doing my work as a journalist, I've not done anything wrong, I just continue doing my work.
Yeah. One of the conditions that was given again with this bail application or bail granting is that you should stop tweeting messages that incite people into some kind of revolt against the state. What does that really mean for you?
Well, these are conditions put in order for you to get bail, but some of them, they are actually unconstitutional. For instance, in some of the conditions that say you can't tweet things that will incite people or perceived to be inciting people, they go against the tenets of constitutionalism, because my freedom of speech and freedom of the press is guaranteed under the Constitution. So some of them, they are given to us as part of our bail, but we just ignore some of them because they are not an issue, and the judiciary actually understands this. You can't take me to court for having breached a bail order, which in itself is unconstitutional.
Now, the claim by the state that you are tweeting falsehoods, are you going to challenge that?
It's a lie, because I never tweeted what they're claiming in court that I tweeted. So my lead counsel, Mr. Harrison Ngomo, asked them to produce the evidence of the tweet, and they couldn't because there's no such evidence. There was never such a tweet. It was just meant to persecute me. It was just a way to get me into prison and to detain me for the 19 days that I was in prison. And the major surprise that was also something that was turned upside down in the High Court, because the High Court judge said there was no such evidence that was put before the court.
What does this mean in terms of the nature of the relationship right now, currently, between the media in Zimbabwe and the state? And what does it mean in terms of reporting on the corruption, or even whatever it is that is going on within the state right now? Does it mean even the other media houses, not even yourself alone at this point, are afraid to expose what is going on?
You are very right. These arrests are done to intimidate not just myself, but to intimidate journalists and especially the young journalists, to say, if we can do this to this internationally acclaimed senior journalist, what can we do to you? Imagine what we can do to you if you do the same thing as he's doing, exposing corruption that embarrasses not only the president, but the ruling party and the government. And you're also right, because the arrests on Hopewell Chin'ono have a consequence, not just on journalists, but on society at large. People become timid. People are now afraid of saying what they know, especially about corruption, because they'll be thinking that, Hopewell Chin'ono could go to prison and spend 45 days. In fact, in the past 6 months, I've spent 81 days in Chikurubi maximum prison. So that has sort of instilled the fear of God in citizens who are worried. And you see that on Twitter, people are afraid to express themselves using their proper identities. They end up opening ghost accounts in order to express their displeasure at the Mnangagwa regime.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're a free man?
Well, I'm out of prison, but I'm in a big prison. Zimbabwe has become such a big prison because it can't be a democratic society where citizens are afraid to express themselves for fear of going to jail. So I feel that I've been taken out of the maximum prison, but I'm still in prison because Zimbabwe has become a prison. If you don't conform to the unconstitutional ways of doing things we expect us to do, you're thrown into prison.
Yeah. You talk of constitutionalism and you talk of democracy and the rule of law. One would want to think there is some level of hope still in you in the institutions of Zimbabwe. You still believe in the court system to an extent. You're still going through the processes of the court system. You've got your lawyer that continually is fighting for you in that system. Is the judiciary still holding?
Well, unfortunately, one of the bail conditions is that I can't comment on that. Otherwise, I'll go back to prison. My second case involved the National Prosecution Authority, where I revealed again a case of corruption. The president's niece, Miss Henrietta Rushwaya, was quoted Robert Mugabe International Airport with of gold trying to go to Dubai. And when I found out from my contacts that they were trying to do a corrupt deal to allow her to go home and not oppose bail, I tweeted about it and I was arrested, and they said I'm obstructing justice. So one of the bail conditions on that case is that I can't comment about the judiciary.
What are you now working on? I mean, now that you're out, are you looking at unearthing more corruption? What are you looking at?
The biggest disappointment is that they've taken my passport away. I was supposed to be in Ethiopia a greater part of last year, making a documentary on mental illness, a sequel to my last documentary film called State of Mind, which was looking at mental illness in Zimbabwe. Now I wanted to do a sequel in Ethiopia. This year, I was supposed to be in England making a documentary film on COVID-19 and how it's affecting Black communities in Britain. So they've stopped me from doing my work. They took a camera away from my home, which is worth over $100,000 US. And so now I've got nothing else to do. So that's why I'm now focusing on journalism and investigative journalism, revealing the corrupt nature of Zimbabwe, or what I would rather call misgovernance in Zimbabwe.
Yeah. Are any other members of your family affected by this? How do they feel about the work that you're doing? Are they being sidelined as well and intimidated? And is there anything that is happening to them?
Well, members of my family are naturally affected because when your loved one is thrown into that, it affects you. So members of my family, the extended part of the family, the immediate part of the family, they are all stressed out each time when I go to prison because they have to bring food for me in prison. They're afraid that I'll be poisoned. They have to come to court to make sure that I'm feeling well. Sometimes they realize that my health is failing because there was a time when I spent 2 weeks just living on a diet of biscuits and orange juice. Naturally, it does affect them, and it's part of the torture process and psychologically process of trying to break you down in order for you to stop doing the work that you're supposed to be doing as a journalist.
Has it affected your way of making a living? I mean, how does that affect your day-to-day way of making money and taking care of yourself, buying yourself food, shelter, and so on?
Well, fortunately, I've been in journalism for the past 30 years. Savings, of course, affected the way I've earned my living in the past 6 months because I haven't been able to work properly the way I should be working. As I said, I was supposed to be making documentaries in Ethiopia and in Britain, but I'm stuck here in Zimbabwe because of these court cases, and I can't leave until they're finished. And that's another way of trying to stop me from doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Ironically, if I was out of be focused on what's happening in Zimbabwe, but the fact that they've detained me in Zimbabwe, it makes it impossible for me to do anything else other than focus on the investigative journalism and what's happening in Zimbabwe.
I Hopewell, appreciate your time and tonight. Maybe final thought, what do you make of the response or even lack of response from, for example, the African Union on how you've been treated, but also other parts of the international community, and where do you hope your name being Hopewell and all, your help is going to come from?
Well, the irony is that for the first time in the history of our crisis, our 20-year-old crisis in Zimbabwe, the African Union did pronounce on my arrest, and they said it was unconstitutional. They said it was wrong. And I'm happy that the South African government, for the first time, is now making the right noises. The ANC chairperson, Mr. Gwede Mandeshe, spoke about the relationship between the ANC and the Zimbabwean government. And he said that it's unhealthy because ZANU-PF and the Zimbabwean government uses threats in trying to manage that relationship. And your finance minister, and he said that the relationship between the South Africans, the South African government and the Zimbabwean government and ZANU-PF and ANC is now based on abuse, is an abusive relationship. ZANU-PF uses abuse in trying to manage that relationship. So I'm glad that internationally and especially locally on the continent, people are starting to realize that it's bad. When I come out of prison, I get calls from presidents. I can't pronounce they are because it's done in confidence. I get calls from government ministers from other countries who sympathize with what's happening to me. I get calls from ambassadors, African ambassadors, something that was never like that before. But they realize that what is happening to me, it makes it difficult for even the region to attract investment because nobody wants to go to a country or a region where courts seem like they're being manipulated, where if you enter into a dispute with government, you never get fair trial, you never get a fair hearing. So it affects not only Zimbabwe, but the region as well.
Hopewell Chin'ono, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us tonight on the Newsfeed Late Night. Zimbabwean investigative journalist Hopewell Chin'ono out now on bail, saying he will continue with his investigative work unearthing misgovernance in Zimbabwe.